Hello and welcome to Follow the Money. I'm Paolo del Rosario sitting in for Rain Musngi. Join us as we explore the tools and insights you need to jumpstart your financial journey. As the Philippines mining sector faces pivotal legislative and environmental shifts, industry leaders are navigating a complex landscape of challenges and opportunities. Today on Follow the Money, we welcome Mike Toledo, Attorney Mike Toledo, President and CEO of the Chamber of Mines of the Philippines, to discuss these pressing developments. So good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good afternoon, Paolo. This is actually the first time I get to see you in the afternoon because from time to time, I get to see you in the morning show. And I have to admit, you guys are doing a great job.
Thank you so much for that. To be honest, I'm still getting used to the afternoon. I'm not used to seeing daylight this long. But Attorney, let's start off first with arguably one of the more pressing developments here when it comes to Philippine mining, and that is going to have to be the pending legislation when it comes to the banning of raw mineral exports in the country. Obviously, the Philippines is one of the top producers of certain raw materials. Just looking at how the mining industry is trying to adapt to it, how has the response been from the industry within, considering it's going to take 5 years after the bill turns into a law that it will actually be implemented?
Very good question, Paolo, and very timely. Well, for one thing, let me just be very clear that as far as the industry is concerned, we are not averse or against value-added processing. We are for it. Unfortunately, before that actually happens, before that actually becomes a successful proposition, there are still certain things that needs to be done and certain things that need to be considered. For example, the cost of power in the country is quite high as compared to other countries. Maybe we should compare ourselves because the comparison has always been with Indonesia and the processing that's being done in Indonesia. Indonesia has power rates cheaper than ours. Indonesia has a lot of coal, which means, again, it contributes to the lowering of the cost of power. Indonesia, for example, it's nickel. They're the number one supplier of nickel, but their nickel is of a higher quality. It's a saprolite as compared to ours, which is of a lower quality. Mm-hmm. And perhaps, lastly, but there's actually a plethora of reasons that I could even adduce today, but perhaps lastly, the fact that we need more mines. We need more mines to justify coming up with a processing plant. Mm-hmm. So having said that, as a backgrounder, of course, the mining fiscal regime that you mentioned that is now pending in the bicameral committee in the Senate and the House, they're discussing right now, includes that provision on the export ban, which will take effect as the law stands more or less 5 years after the law takes effect. This is still not final. We are still negotiating. We are still saying that perhaps it could be 8 years, perhaps it could be 10, and perhaps also allowing the president to make a determination as to whether or not an import ban should indeed be implemented at a certain point in time, or would it be possible to delay it a bit? Because precisely, it has to take into consideration the economic conditions as well as the condition of the industry. We are not against it. We are for it. We are for value adding. But before we really launch into such, we have to make sure that the legal, regulatory, financial, and economic framework in the country would allow processing plants to be put up because it costs a lot, Paolo.
Yes.
A processing plant could cost about $1.6 billion. And if you do not have enough input to justify the putting of a processing plant, then who will invest?
Mm-hmm. Attorney, one of the issues also is the fact that the Philippines is just using nickel as an example here, one of the lead top producers of nickel around the world, with a majority of our exports actually going to China and a big part to Indonesia as well. You take a look at the demand for Philippine and nickel, just having these conversations, maybe jumping the gun here a bit, but how would you see or project that it could affect the demand for Philippine nickel?
Well, definitely it could affect the demand because if there is an export ban, and it has been proven that in the past, when other countries did have an export ban, it actually backfired. It will definitely. It will affect the global supply chain, for example, because the Philippines right now is the number two supplier of nickel, albeit, as mentioned earlier, of a lesser quality than that of Indonesia. So an export ban definitely will have an impact on the demand for Philippine nickel, and then of course, obviously the ability of the Philippines to supply because of the ban, and at the same time, it will also disrupt to a certain extent the value chain on this particular commodity.
And of course, before we move on from this, you mentioned that negotiations on trying to expand it for maybe 8 to 10 years after implementation, as opposed to the five being proposed. Is there an actual realistic timeline of if and when, let's say, those coming into refined raw minerals are going to come into the Philippines? Will 5 years be enough to get them actually started in terms of actually producing and trying to make up the numbers that we may have lost given an export ban in terms of raw materials like nickel?
Well, actually, we really feel that 5 years is not enough. It is too short. It's really too short a time. But I guess that's how it is when it comes to these things. You negotiate. Perhaps it is the position of certain members of our legislature or members of Congress. Maybe they have been provided information and data that perhaps 5 years is sufficient, or maybe as a starting point for negotiations. But right now, off the bat, I can say, and I think everybody in the industry, especially those in the nickel industry, would agree that 5 years, an export ban starting 5 years after law takes its effect would be too short. You need more, definitely more than 5 years to be able to justify, for the reasons I've already given, and for reasons perhaps that I could still be giving in the future,
Yeah.
that to justify really the putting up of a processing plant.
Well, Attorney, moving on, we also now have to talk about the environmental aspect when it comes to mining here. In fact, there have been efforts by your organization in particular to try and reach the sustainable mining goals. There is a TSM initiative that the COMP has had towards sustainable mining. I believe it started way back in 2017 for COMP. When you take a look at the efforts now required to try and be more responsible as an industry, could you tell us a bit about the efforts being done to reach the sustainable goals that the mining industry is trying to reach?
Again, Paolo, thank you for this opportunity to talk about TSM, to talk about sustainable mining, which is the TSM is a practice that has been observed in several countries. It started in Canada, and now we are one of the countries, I'm proud to say, one of the countries, and the chamber really pushed for it, especially during the time of Chairman Jerry Primo, and now Rocky Di Maculangan, who is our TSM champion here in the Philippines. TSM, in essence, to just simplify it, means we already have an existing mining law, the 1995 Mining Act, which is one of the most stringent mining act ever crafted. It copied or even improved on the best practices of all mining jurisdictions throughout the world and came up with this Mining Act. Now, we are saying, by adopting TSM, the industry is saying that we can even go beyond the requirements of the law. Total sustainable mining, in effect, says, yes, we have a law. Yes, it is very stringent. We will follow it. But guess what? We will even go beyond the requirements of the law. That is TSM. And it is good that you asked that because, for the longest time, mining has always been the poster boy, the bad boy, for allegedly destroying the environment because of how we operate. But the sad part is most of the big mining companies are responsible. And the reality is mining now is the most indispensable industry in the fight for climate change because you need nickel, you need copper, and you need the other rare minerals in order to come up with solar panels, batteries, electronic vehicles. So now even the environmentalists are saying that, hey, wait a minute, let's take a look at this. But at the end of the day, for as long as it is sustainable, it is responsible, and then it is done in due recognition of the areas where we operate, then mining must be allowed to flourish. And TSM, as you mentioned, is one of the ways to ensure that mining is done responsibly. Again, let me repeat, it is doing things way beyond the requirement of the law.
And just to clarify here, because I'm reading reports as well from the Chamber of Mines of the Philippines, from your own website, that the mines are both subject to self-assessment reports as well as to independent external verification when it comes to making sure that you do reach the goals of the TSM. And of course, is all in line with trying to reach the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals that is addressing the environment.
Yes, in fact, again, I'm glad you raised that because just recently, the DNR Secretary, Secretary Tony Loizaga, and if I may say, we're very lucky to have such a secretary heading the DNR because she decides on and makes policies on the basis of empirical data, not on emotion. And she makes it a point to discuss with all stakeholders before major decisions are made. And that is really something, a breath of fresh air as far as this industry is concerned. And just of late, she came up with a DNR administrative order, which in effect requires all mining companies to align their SDMPs or the Social Development Management Programs to the UN Social Development Goals or Sustainable Development Goals or SDGs,
Yeah.
which I believe is about 14 or 17. And just to perhaps to explain to our audience, SDMP is a requirement under the law which requires mining companies to spend 1.5% of their operating costs on projects under the SDNP program. And what are these essentially? In a nutshell, it's essentially working with the local governments to identify what do they need in terms of infrastructure, in terms of livelihood, in terms of education, in terms of health, and all that. So building roads, building clinics, building schools, building hospitals. Now, what the DNR is saying that mining companies, with your SDMPs, can you please align that with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations? And we're happy to say that we've actually been doing it. In
Yeah.
fact, we can say that 11 out of 17 of the SDGs mentioned or identified by the UN, the mining companies have been doing it or are committed to do it.
Well, Attorney, just to piggyback on that, since we're talking about the environment as well as the sustainability and basically what mining has been doing to become more responsible, the Board of Investment is actually advocating for the Philippines to become a hub of what they call green metals. You take a look at the investment required of that to actually happen. Just what is needed to realize this vision? And for those wondering, ano po nga ba ang green metals?
Well, green metals are essentially the ones that are being used to for renewable energy projects, energy programs, for batteries, for electric vehicles. So that's exactly are the green metals. And these are, of course, as I mentioned earlier, very importantly, nickel and copper, very crucial components in the fight against climate change, very crucial components in the production of batteries and electric vehicles and solar panels and the like. And of course there are other related green metal minerals as well that are being used to ensure that we comply with all our requirements as far as going less carbon, going carbonless. We have several commitments both locally as well as internationally in several treaties. So definitely the Philippines have been identified according to USGA statistics or studies, to be the fifth highly mineralized country in the world. 5 in gold, I believe, 3 or 4 in nickel, or I think we're 2 in nickel, and we have cobalt, and we have copper, and again, essential components for equipment or essential component to make sure that we come up with all the necessary products to ensure that we come up with these products to fight climate change. So we have the minerals. It's just a question of getting them out of the ground. We are very rich. We have been identified. So it's just a question of And the demand, by the way, for these minerals have gone up. The
Yes.
demand for nickel has gone up. The demand for gold, especially gold right now, because I guess of the global uncertainty happening, the tariffs that are being
Imposed by
imposed by
United States. Yes.
President Trump, United States, the war in the Ukraine, well, the one in Hamas, but at least hopefully
Yeah.
there's a ceasefire. No? But in other words, when there is uncertainty, the safe haven has always been gold. So gold has also been going up.
Actually,
So
attorney, you are touching on a great point here, and in fact, I want to talk about that when we return from the break because we have to pause for a few reminders. We're still with the president and CEO of the Chamber of Mines of the Philippines, attorney Mike Toledo. Don't go away. You're still watching Follow the Money. We'll be right back. And welcome back. You're still watching Follow the Money. We're still with the Chamber of Mines President and CEO, Attorney Mike Toledo. Thank you very much for staying on with us. We could have a podcast, but then we don't have enough time, Attorney. But let's talk first about gold. You mentioned about gold a while ago. The prices have been soaring. There has been a bit of a dip in the last few days, but then in general, the price has been higher than usual. A lot of it is being pointed to the uncertainty in the global geopolitical scene, the United States in particular. A lot of people are trying to get away from the dollar and stocking up on their reserve assets and trying to go back to gold just a bit. And with that, how can the Philippines try and take advantage of the fact that gold prices have been soaring, a record high, if I'm not mistaken, in the past few years?
yes, in fact, in one interview, I even predicted that it could possibly hit $3,000 per ounce. And if I'm not mistaken, the last time I looked at it, it was close to that. It was about 2,900, I think. But of course, it's constantly moving. So clearly, when as I mentioned earlier before the break, when there's uncertainty, especially now because of what I would like to call the Trump factor, these kind of uncertainties makes gold very, very attractive as a safe haven for investments. So again, this is an opportunity for the country to take advantage of that, as you correctly pointed out. There's a strong demand for nickel and copper because of the shift towards renewables. All
Yes.
countries are saying, hey, look, we have to reach this target, carbon free at a certain date. We have to be carbon free. It's a global effort. Now, so what better time to position ourselves as the number one supplier of these basic metals for the fight against climate change? Same with gold. There seems to be, as we know, because of this uncertainty, they are flocking to gold. So the demand for gold has increased. So now more than ever, we should really allow the mining industry that are involved in extracting these basic and much needed minerals to flourish. And how can it flourish? Simply by allowing mining companies to be able to get their permits on time. It's really essentially the issue really that deters both foreign and local investors in mining is the question of the ease of doing business. As I had the opportunity to present to President BBM, and I believe this is the first time in the history of the industry that the mining industry was able to present to a sitting president. One of the issues that I raised and asked for assistance is essentially the ease of doing business, because it takes about, from what we understand, about more than 1,000 signatures to get a mineral processing supply agreement. As you know, our group is also into power plants, and that takes about 68 to 70 permits. Still a lot.
Yeah.
Putting up a cell, as you know, we're also into telco, and for a cellular tower, you need about 32 permits. Still a lot, but lo and behold, for MPSA or exploration permit, you need 1,000. But let me quickly add to that, Paolo, that was the case before. With the incoming administration, especially with Secretary Luisaga there, that has pushed for the digitalization of getting the permitting process, and also having a secretary of the anti-rated authority, Secretary Nes Perez, who is laser focused on ensuring that permitting would really be cut short. And of course, under the orders of His Excellency himself, BBM, these have changed tremendously for the better. It has definitely cut down the permitting time. Uh, of course, much still needs to be done, but a great big step has been taken, and the focus is there. It is not Niñas Kugon. It is not, okay, let's do it now. All the passion is there, but all of a sudden, after a few weeks, a few months, it's gone.
Yes.
Nobody's already handling the kitchen. No, not this time. Secretary Loizaga, Nes Perez, and the industry as well, and of course, the economic managers like Secretary Decgo and of course His Excellency the President are making sure that what we presented during the PISAC meeting, the needs, the wants, the recommendations are actually being executed and implemented. That is why we feel that this is really the golden age of mining.
Yeah.
We have an administration, a president that understands the importance of mining, that it's a low-hanging fruit, economic managers who think the same way, a strong demand for minerals need for the fight against climate change, a strong demand for gold, for example, because of the uncertainties going around the world. We live in a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, ambiguous, and complex. And
Yes.
sadly, I mean, ironically, because of its VUCA world, gold is really the mineral in demand. So now is really a good time
Okay.
to allow the industry to flourish.
All right, Attorney, we have around 5 minutes left, and I want to touch on something that you mentioned a while ago, especially with your meeting with President Bongbong Marcos, because of the fact that minerals, especially on a global diplomacy scene, has become a big talking point. We mentioned the United States a while ago. You called it the Trump effect, almost, with the rising of gold as well. The U.S. has urged the Philippines to actually pursue a critical minerals agreement, and that would really affect your industry, in particular, the mining industry here in the Philippines. We talk about opportunities, and we talk about the potential of the Philippines to leverage certain diplomatic agreements using its own minerals. Has that been part of the conversation with President Bongbong Marcos? And of course, what could the Philippine mining community and industry offer when it comes to these global discussions, and how are you being flexible enough to react to them? I'm sorry, that's a mouthful, but we only have 5 minutes.
No, very good question. In fact, let me just say one. A few years ago, it was still during the time of President Duterte. I do not recall her name, but she was one of the senior officials of the United States Trade Department, and we actually met, and she wanted to know more about the mining industry. And so, in that meeting, together with her team, I asked point blank, is there a possibility that the United States can enter into a critical mineral agreement or a CMA in the same way that you have entered, or the United States have entered with other countries? Uh, the answer was not a no, but not exactly a yes either, because from what I understand, it is really a process, and domestically, there are certain issues that they have to address before they do agree into entering into a critical mineral agreement. I guess in the same way that when discussions on free trade agreements are concerned, these are things that, depending on the administration and the focus and thrust of any sitting administration, they would have to consider, of course, the needs, of course, of their own consistencies and their domestic industries. So, as far as I recall, and I think the position is the same and consistent, we are hoping to enter into a critical minerals agreement with the United States and with other countries for that matter.
And of course, you mentioned it a while ago, also with other countries. You mentioned the shift as well of using the green metals in terms of trying to, or in terms of like showing that mining is important, especially when it comes to the UN's SDG. Is the Philippines in a position here, even with a pending raw export ban, which could happen maybe 5, 6, 7, I don't know how the negotiations would go. Are we in a position to actually take advantage of all of that?
I believe so, Paolo. I believe so that we are in a position. the industry is in a position, the country is in a position, the administration, government's in a position to be able to take advantage of that. But of course, it is really hope that the matter of the export ban be thoroughly discussed, that provisions be put in place to make sure that we are able to make adjustments immediately should there be certain shifts in how things are going around the world. Sometimes we cannot be so come up with so what you call hard and fast rules or rules that are clad in iron, and then that will not leave you the opportunity to make adjustments when there is a need to adjust. You have to remember that minerals, by its very nature, it's cyclical. Sometimes nickel goes up, sometimes nickels really go down, gold goes up. There was a time gold went down to almost like $750 an ounce, something like that. So there must be a recognition when you make that law. It must be crafted in such a way that there is a provision that allows you to immediately react and adjust to changing global geopolitical economic realities. It is done in other countries. It is done in other countries. They come up with a law or an internal regulation, an IRR, which would give government the flexibility, the dynamism to adjust immediately to changes in the global scene.
That is Attorney Mike Toledo, the President and CEO of the Chamber of Mines of the Philippines. Thank you so much for your time, sharing your insights, and hopefully we can have you in studio next time.
Oh, I'd love that, Paolo. And thank you so much, really. It's been a pleasure to be your guest and to be a guest of Bilyonaryo TV. I'm a fan.
Thank you so much, Attorney. Maybe in the morning show as well, we can have you over. Thank you so much.
We'll try in the morning. Yeah, okay.
As the industry navigates legislative challenges and global partnerships, it's evident that collaboration and sustainable practices are essential for future success. Now, before we go, we leave you with this. This thought from Oxford University researcher Stefan Lezak. Communities have depended on coal mining for years, but that's not an appropriate line of reasoning for continuing to extract and burn coal. And that's it for today's edition of Follow the Money. On behalf of Rain Musngi, I'm Paolo del Rosario. Thank you for watching. Keep it here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo News Channel, always on top.